Do you feel you were born for more? Get ready to uncover your God-given purpose so you can impact the world with your gifts, your talents, and your story. Welcome to the Purpose Power Summit. I'm your host, Mimika Cooney, and today's guest is going to share about how to turn your mess into a message. Lori Wildenberg, mom of four, is passionate about helping families build connections that last a lifetime. As a licensed parent-family educator, she's professionally equipped to encourage and empower moms and dads to be parents to their children. With over 25 years' experience working with parents and kids in the faith-based and secular settings, her philosophy is focused on developing child's heart and character and a family system dependent on God. She's the author of Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home, and is a co-author of 3 books, while writing her 5th book. As a national speaker, Lori is a member of the Advanced Writers and Speakers Association. She is the co-founder of 1 Corinthians 13 Parenting Ministry, a resource site for parents and those who work with families. And she is on staff as a parent coach at Healing for the Soul and volunteers her time mentoring women at the Moms Together Facebook community, as well as being a freelance writer for a number of online Christian parenting magazines. So, wow, that is an awesome bio. I got to say, welcome, Lori, to our summit. I'm so excited to chat to you today.
I'm so happy to be here, Mimika. It's just really great and excited to give, I hope, a really encouraging message to the moms.
Exactly.
And the women that are joining us.
Well, we have some really good content we want to help you, because I know if you're anything like me, like sometimes we feel like life is a hot mess, but it becomes a great message when we know how to put the pieces together, because we are spirit, body, and soul. God made us that way for a reason, and it's a matter of us finding our groove and our balance and knowing how to put those things together, because He's given us tools. But before we get into that great content, share with our audience how you got started doing what you're doing today.
Oh my gosh, it really is God-led for sure. So with your summit being all about your passion and your purpose, really discovering what your passion is so important. And I was a former elementary school teacher, and then we had our 4 kids, and I stayed at home. And I discovered I had really a few passions. I had a passion for teaching and a passion for parenting. And I decided that it would be so awesome to put those 2 things together. And how I discovered how to do that was our oldest child was one of those, as she was younger, what you might say a mother killer. She was really a hard kid, and part of it was she had some disabilities. So I needed some help. And I started going to some parenting classes and thought, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to combine my faith and also parenting and teaching to help other parents who were struggling and maybe didn't expect to struggle. I didn't expect to struggle with our first child. You know, I taught elementary school. I sort of thought I knew it all, right? But God shows you differently. And I realized that, parenting is a challenging thing a lot of times. And so then a couple years later, I ended up getting my parent and family educator license and taught in the public schools, the parents in the public schools, but my real passion was to combine my faith with that. And so then I started teaching a class at church. And that has really snowballed. And now, since that time, we moved to Colorado from Minnesota, where I was teaching. And now I continue to do this, and as God would have it, write books, which is the craziest thing, because that wasn't anything I had ever expected to do. So sometimes passions and purpose sometimes grow organically. They're not things that you expect to happen. And so when I had people taking my classes, they were saying things to me such as, well, you need to put this material in a book. And I told them perhaps they should just take notes. I was very busy with my 4 little kids, and I didn't have time to write a book. Well, then one of the gals who was helping me with my class, she was one of my small group discussion leaders. she told me, and her name's Becky Danielson, that she'd always wanted to write a book. And so she said, but I think what was missing was the right content. And she said, I think this is it. So then that's how the two of us wrote the first of our 3 co-authored books. And leading into the mess in the message, that led to my 4th book with the same child who helped me get into this situation, had some prodigal moments, and you feel very alone when you're in those situations. And what God encouraged me is that there are others who have those same feelings. Their situations may be different, but similar feelings. And that's what ended up being Messy Journey, the 4th book. So.
I tell you, well, I totally identify with that because I'm a mom of 3 kids ranging between the ages of almost 19 and 7. And I myself am standing in faith for a prodigal child right now. And I totally agree with you that this can be a really painful process. And this is part of the catalyst of what I'm doing today, is because as a parent, you think we have it all together. And I love what you said, like, well, we know everything, right? We have our first child and we think, I'm never going to let my child do that. I'm never going to let her sleep with the passy. I'm never going to let her fall asleep on my lap. I'm never. And then what happens? Those things come back to bite us in the butt, especially with spoken judgment over other people's children. Warning sign, don't do that, because you come back to get tested on what you judge yourself. And God knows everything, right? And I'm like, oh. And I've personally found, this walk has been very lonely and very scary, because when I was going through it, first of all, there's the shame. Like, I don't want people to know I'm going through this if I'm not Miss Perfect, right? Oh, scandal. What if they know I don't have it all together? And realizing that, from the outside, what people see on social media, they think, oh, well, she's got it perfect and she's so lucky. But I think as women, we're very hard on ourselves, and we don't realize that sometimes it's not great to try and do these things on your own. And that's why I love resources that you're offering, like in your book, and really helping other women identify, listen, you're not alone. So let's really dive into that content, like knowing that we have this situation. What advice would you give our audience today about how we can move through that?
Oh, Mimika, I am so glad you asked this question, because you're right. We feel such shame, and we just, especially with social media, we're looking at everybody's Christmas cards every day, right? With Facebook, everyone's putting on their best face, which of course you would, right? But then you perceive that is how it's like for somebody day in and day out. And suffering can come in a couple different forms, right? Well, we had one situation in our family where one of our kids, our youngest one, was in a near fatal snowboard accident. And it was highly traumatic, very scary. But I had no trouble calling on my prayer warriors, asking people to come to the hospital, letting people know we needed help, accepting meals, that kind of thing, because it was a snowboard accident, right? Or a friend of mine, her son was diagnosed with cancer, and we all were able to rush in and help them. But yet when you have something that's more of a mess or a prodigal kind of a deal, we are quiet. And that's just what the enemy wants. He wants to isolate us. And what we need to do instead is to reach out to those that we trust, because some people will not be helpful, shall we say. But the ones that we trust, we need to be able to reach out and say, hey, this is going on and we need prayer. And since that time, I've got a prayer partner that I've been praying with for probably, I think it's been at least 7 years, maybe longer, that we pray weekly. And it's so important for us to reach out, to be honest and transparent, and maybe not with everybody, but with at least a trusted few, and to get that support and to realize that everybody struggles with something. Even though we may not believe it, that is true. So
I mean, that's the thing is if we know that we're not alone, and it's kind of like we condemn ourselves. And I know I went through this whole process, like, Yeah, I've got it all together. I'm all in control, but things happen that rock your control, your idea of how life should be. And then you start to realize you really have to rely on your faith that, there's things that my life is a hot mess. I'm not qualified to run it by myself, which is why I need God. It's not because I've got it together. It's because I don't. It's the reason why I have my faith. But as women, I think we are very hard on ourselves. And I love how you say that you need reaching out and having somebody who's like-minded and who can stand in agreement and pray with you is like so vitally important. Like, what other things would you say would be a great way to sort of help us work through this?
Well, this might sound a little counterintuitive, but I think you have to step away from the situation as well. I think you need to have time where you're not totally engrossed in whatever the mess might be, because that wreaks havoc on your spiritual, mental, and emotional, and even physical self. Physically, I remember feeling as if when we were in the worst of the worst part of it, when our daughter was actually even estranged from us. And I could barely get out of bed. I was so immersed in the grief of it all. And to remember that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Corrie ten Boom has this great quote that she says, when you're going through the tunnel and it's dark, you don't just jump off the train, you trust the engineer. And so we want to trust our engineer, stay on the train. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And to get up and get out of bed and do something, go for a hike, go for a walk. I love to take my dog for a walk. That for me is really something that really soothes my soul. Maybe even see a funny movie. I had some parents that I was coaching, and their daughter was in a very difficult situation where she was living with a man who had 4 young children, and his wife had died under kind of suspicious circumstances. So they were scared for their daughter, and she had really they were estranged from her. And so I recommended that the two of them go out on the weekend and just enjoy each other and make a pact not to talk about their daughter and the big problem. And the next week when I saw them, it looked like their burden was so much lighter. And we can't get so engrossed in that we are ineffective, because our prayers will be weak. In fact, they may not even occur if we can't step out of it a little bit. So I really think having some distractions, and a lot of times I also like to use my worry, my mom worry, as a catalyst for prayer. So when I start to worry and all of that starts seeping into my mind and my heart and my soul, I've decided, instead of letting that overwhelm me, to stop and to pray for my daughter and for the situation. I have found then I end up worrying a heck of a lot less. And I think part of that is that attack lessens its impact, because now I'm turning that into prayer. So I think self-care and prayer are really some very helpful things to do.
I love what you talk about in self-care, because here's another thing. I'm totally on board on that side, because when I was going through this experience physically, like, it was a spiritual thing, but physically I felt it, and I wasn't being kind to myself, giving myself that time to rest and recover, until my body physically said, sorry, time out. You can't do this anymore. It literally was in bed, just like, so I totally identify with that story. What advice would you give us women that when we're in the midst of a storm, because sometimes we think once we're over the storm, then I'll do this, or then I'll pray, or then I'll take care of myself. What advice could you give us for us while we're right in the middle of it?
You know, I have found that this is something that helped me so much, at least initially. I would wake up and I would say, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And that worked for a period of time. But then I have to admit, it stopped working, because I started to feel annoyed that I wasn't rejoicing and I wasn't glad in it. And I was kind of irritated by the whole thing, because frankly, why isn't God answering my prayer? I was very angry about that. And then I felt his nudge to look up Psalm 118 and read it in its entirety. And when you read that psalm, oh my gosh, Mimika, it is incredible because the psalmist is in the middle of a huge battle. And within the battle, he's describing, he's surrounded on all sides. He's feeling as if, death could be any minute, but he's trusting the Lord. And in the middle of this psalm, he's praising him as this is the day the Lord has made. And it really actually pretty much humbled me when I read that. And I hadn't realized or remembered that that psalm was about a battle. And once I got that, then I was able to say, okay, Lord, I trust you, and I know that you love my child even more than I do. So I'm going to get up and I'm going to trust you today. And I think that was the thing that got me out of bed.
So when you say like trusting, because I think this is another thing is we hear about it, we've been in church, we've heard about, oh, you just need to trust God. But when you're in the middle of a situation and you just want to cry and you want to scream and, you want to just like totally lose it because you feel like it's so frustrating. And usually these things don't just end overnight. It's like relentless, one thing after another, and you get attacked from all sides and it affects your mind, it affects your peace, affects your joy. What would you say would be advice for us so that we don't get into falling into anger or falling into, resentment? Because it's very easy to do that. And yet when people say, oh, just rejoice, like, what does that mean? Like, take us through some thought processes, or is there some kind of decrees or declarations you do? What do you find that helps you kind of keep your mind focused on God in that situation?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is it's totally okay to be honest with the Lord about your feelings. He knows them anyway. But it's something that helps me. Like, I'll say, Lord, I am pretty frustrated with this, and I want you to reach in and take care of this. So to pray honestly, I think that's something that is a really important thing to do, is just to be honest with the Lord. And yeah, cry. It's okay. Cry. Sometimes we need to cry. And
just to kind of get it out the system, right? Because if we're holding it together, and especially with us women and us moms, we tend to want to be the fixer. Like that's my thing. I'm always a fixer. If something's broken, or if a child is sick, or something's not working, I'm right in there to fix it. But some things we can't fix, and that's when we realize we lose control. But I think when we give up control, that's when we realize God takes control. Yes. And it's like that peace. And I think I'm finally starting to understand it. Okay, it's still, I'm a work in progress. Okay, nobody's perfect. We're getting there. But understanding that when the storm is raging around you is maybe to recognize what it is. Because would you say sometimes we take it on as the guilt as ourselves, like it's something we did?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So don't take on the water of the storm and sink, right? So stand up against it. But there are times where you are too weak to stand, and that's when you need your Aaron and your Hur on either side of you, right, to lift up your arms. You need to have people that you can rely on and talk to and trust, even when it gets hard. So having those people around. And I think trust is sometimes a moment-by-moment exercise. I don't think that we naturally understand that. I think people that think they do maybe haven't had a big storm perhaps yet. And what gives me also some encouragement is if you look at Scripture, every single one of our biblical heroes had a time of suffering or difficulty or behaving badly. Every single one except for Jesus. So when I think of Peter, who was with Jesus day in and day out for 3 years, and yet he denies him, and that's kind of a big thing. It was a weak moment. We all have weak moments. Or David, a man after God's own heart, a murderer, and he knew the Lord. And
exactly.
Some
people, so we try to compare ourselves. I think we forget that there's humanity in those who we talk about in the Bible. And I think that's the reason why God had their stories told, is to give us that encouragement that just because they were back then doesn't mean that they were perfect and they had it all together.
Right.
I mean, I think that is the whole crux of the message, right? It's
The
just
whole beautiful thing is that the Lord shows us that his people are all flawed. We're all cracked pots. We're all a mess, right? And that's a really awesome thing, because warts and all, God tells us about how the biblical heroes all struggled with stuff. And why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we? I think we have an idea, especially as parents, that if we follow this particular formula, then God will do his part and everything will turn out okay. Well, we do need to do our part and we do need to do our best. But yet we're a flawed individual, and we're working with flawed and sinful individuals. So with free will, oh my gosh, you throw that in there and then it's all blows up.
Oh yeah. I mean, really, I've had to come to Jesus moments on a daily basis about that part where, especially as a parent, because we have babies, we nurture them, we care for them, and we know they're under our control and under our responsibility. But it comes a stage, especially in the teenage years, hint, hint, when they get what we say in England, big for their britches, and they start to push against what it is that you taught them. And you really start to question yourself and your parenting skills. Like my husband and I have a saying is, we burnt the parenting books years ago because all this, the Dr. Spock and you must do this, and brings judgment on ourselves, and especially judgment from others. Like, I don't know, if I'm us women just going to these parenting groups, I stopped going at one stage because I felt like I just couldn't compare. They seem to have their life all together, but either they're in denial or they're lying, because somebody at some stage in their life is going to find this journey hard. Nobody has it together. Our kids are not born with operational manuals. Lord, that would be one thing I need to ask. Could we do that? But that's part of the journey, right? Is understanding that and going through that. But what I find so awesome is I've grown in this situation where I was even 2 years ago to where I'm now. It's like you understand the peace. And wouldn't you say that is really the essence of what this is? Instead of us looking at it as a punishment, we can kind of flip it and think of it as maybe a life lesson.
It certainly deepens your faith, and it gives you a love for God that you wouldn't have otherwise. And I also think it gives you a love for people you might not have otherwise. Going through heartache and hardship when you have no control over something births a compassion and an empathy in a person that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I think that is part of the journey. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I tell you, we've covered some really good hot topics, and I know these are conversations I love to have, because it's conversations that people are usually scared to admit and scared to talk about. But I think it's important that we, realize that you're not alone. That if you feel like you're suffering in silence from shame or condemnation or judgment, you don't have to be feeling that way. That's why we, create these communities and to reach out. And I love what you said, that you had a prayer warrior friend, because when you feel weak, you want someone to stand with you. So I'm really all for that, finding someone who can help stand with you.
So I am all about creating connections that last a lifetime with your family, right? And in order to do that, you really need to have an intentional way of going about parenting. Even you can still be intentional even in the mess, right? So the reason for a family mission statement is to help focus the family, and when things maybe get off the path a little bit, which there's a pretty good chance they might, you can come back to this statement and to remember that, oh yeah, this is what our family is about. And even though we've veered off the path, this is our hope, this is our goal. I was working with a family who, the first thing they wanted to do, and this is what kind of inspired me to create this actual mission statement, because they wanted to put together a mission statement before we actually did the parent coaching, and I thought that was brilliant. And they had said that they had been looking it up, and it was so hard you want to be able to create something fairly quickly, and that they had been studying mission statements and it seemed way too overwhelming to them. But they wanted this so that they could have this relationship that lasts a lifetime, even in the middle of a mess. Really, why did God bring you together? So,
So kind of having a mission statement doesn't have to be something that, oh, this is what we're going to do, and it's like a great bumper sticker or something we stick on the refrigerator, right? I think this is something that, the same thing in business, because I come from a business background. Having a mission statement keeps you focused. Like when things go wrong, things don't work out as planned, it helps to build your faith in knowing, okay, this didn't work out now, but we know what our mission is. We know what our purpose is as a family, so that irrespective of our circumstances, we don't have to focus on the circumstance, but we can focus on the goal that we know God's wants for our family. And I also think it's a faith statement. Like for me, I'm declaring every day, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Like I know that's true, standing on God's word. And I also think there's something special about putting the effort to pen and paper, actually printing something out. It's like a commitment, wouldn't you say? Like saying that this is what we're going to do.
This is who we are, So it might get hard, but we'll still have respect in our family. It might be difficult, but we will still be kind to one another. So, to identify those characteristics, I think, is really important. And it isn't a list of things to do. It's who you hope to be and what you hope your family to be. So,
Exactly. I think it's going to be great guide for you to actually, start taking action. So make sure to go to mimikacooney.com and click on the Summit tab to download that great gift that Lori's given us today. And if you've enjoyed what Lori had to say, go ahead and share it with your friends. I'm sure you know a friend or someone out there on social media that needs to hear about this and have the encouragement for today. So click on those share buttons that you see below or next to the video. And even if you're listening on audio, make sure to go and forward that email to your friend. We know that there's more people out there who need to hear a message of hope and encouragement so they can walk in their purpose. Their purpose as individuals, as women, and as being part of a family is really helping to reach out with each other. So how can people find you online, Lori? What's the best place that you like to hang out?
Oh, thanks for asking. My website is loriwildenberg.com, LoriWildenberg.com. So
exactly. We'll have all those links as well below in the show notes and below the video. We'll have that for you, so you can go and make sure to go and connect with Lori. Go say hi on Facebook. Tell her you saw on the summit. We want to make sure that you take some action so you can activate yourself into your purpose and really walk out what God has destined you to be. So, as I say, thanks so much for joining me today. Irrespective of all the technical difficulties, we shall prevail. This message will get out. And again, if you haven't shared it yet, go ahead and share it with your friends. We know this message of hope and healing is going to really impact a lot of people. And we're just going to say thanks so much for joining me here today. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person one day.
Thank you so much, Mimika. It's been a pleasure being with you.
You too. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you want more free resources that we only share with our newsletter community, go to mimikacooney.com and sign up today. We have great resources like ebooks, inspirational screensavers, printables, and exclusive access to our community.